I was having a meal at my in-laws' house like usual. However, in the middle of such a meal, I was struck by an incredible sleepiness and plopped down on the dining table. In my dazed consciousness, I heard my husband's laughter, and
"It finally worked. Let's take her to the mattress."
I tried to resist, but my consciousness faded away, and when I came to, I was lying on a hospital bed. My mother-in-law, who was attending to me, told me a shocking truth. I'm Kristen, a 26-year-old office worker. My husband Archie is also a 26-year-old office worker. We met as colleagues at work, and our similar hobbies and views on love brought us closer together, and we got married after 2 years of dating. I was 25 years old. During our relationship, Archie and I enjoyed snowboarding, which was a common hobby of ours, and we often went on trips, and Archie would make plans for us on those trips. I was having trouble fitting in at work at the time, but Archie comforted me about it, and thanks to him, who was such a strong ally, I was mentally supported and gradually began to fit in at work. Archie was the second son, but since my brother-in-law, the eldest son, had found a job far away from home after we got married, my parents-in-law, especially my father-in-law, started urging me to have a grandchild as soon as possible. However, we had discussed and decided not to have children until our savings reaches a target amount, and I asked Archie several times to tell him that, but his urging was there every time we saw each other. My parents-in-law's house was less than an hour's drive away, and once or twice a month, we would visit them and have dinner there. My in-laws are what you would call old-fashioned people, and my father-in-law always believed in a patriarchal household. My mother-in-law was a quiet woman who stood quietly behind my father-in-law and took care of him. However, from my point of view, his belief was often excessive, and when something happened that he didn't like, he would be harsh with my mother-in-law, even when it had nothing to do with her, and sometimes he would yell at her unreasonably. I felt incredibly uncomfortable, but Archie did not care about this, and I had to live with the atmosphere, knowing that it was not something I, as his wife, was allowed to interfere with. On the other hand, my father was a loving husband, and he took care of my mother, and she was very grateful to him. I was quite surprised at the gap between my own parents and my parents-in-law's image of a married couple. The main cause of my unease was the fact that Archie had no doubts about his parents' relationship. On the contrary, he took advantage of my father-in-law's unreasonableness toward my mother-in-law.
"Mom, you're really slow."
In response, my mother-in-law responded with a sad smile and said, "I'm sorry." I was so pained to see my mother-in-law apologizing with a sad smile. On our way home from my parents-in-law's house, I said to Archie, "Why do you blame your mother like that when it's not her fault?"
"Dad worked hard to support our family, but Mom is a stay-at-home mom, and instead of giving Dad a break, she often irritates him, so she deserved to be called out like that."
He said something so outrageous. By irritating him, do you mean because she didn't put the condiment in front of him on the table? And not knowing the whereabouts of his lost glasses? He's not a child. Archie wrinkled his brow.
"A stay-at-home mom is the one who takes care of the house, so that the husband can live at home without any problems. You work, so I don't expect you to do that much. But when we have kids, I will leave taking care of the house to you."
Huh? What's that supposed to mean? Does that mean that you will not do your share of taking care of the household at all? That's impossible. When I responded with strong words like that, Archie immediately became a little upset.
"I'm not saying that, but..."
Archie is more uptight after dealing with my father-in-law, and we often have this kind of exchange on the way home from my in-laws' house. I was not a quiet woman like my mother-in-law, and neither my father-in-law's nor Archie's attitude was at all acceptable. So every time I would answer back, and the conversation would end. However, Archie gradually became more and more influenced by my father-in-law and began to make greater demands of me, and I would argue against it.
But you will eventually stop working, right? You have to prepare for that now.
Can you live on your income alone and not put up with anything from your children? No, right? Even if we both work, we might have to put up with a few things depending on how many kids we have.
By the time the kids are born, my income will be higher too, right?
Will you tell me what to do when that happens then? Don't tell me to do all the housework now, or to visit my in-laws alone, or be a big jerk. Archie's face turned bright red at what I said, but he seems to be at a loss for words, so he cut off the conversation as if he was trying to escape. After a while, my father-in-law contacted me again.
Kristen, I heard you rebelled against Archie again, didn't you?
Rebelled? I only disagreed with him. We were just discussing our marriage.
You are not going to produce an heir, and you are talking back to Archie, the head of your household. When are you going to have children?
You talk about heirs, but I'm not going to let them take over your house even if they're born. Archie is always talking to me like you, but how can you meddle in your grown son's family and call me every time?
You? Who are you talking to?
My forceful rebuttal left him speechless, as it did to Archie, and in the end, he said,
Enough!
He hung up the phone childishly. I was still thinking naively how I could convince Archie, who had been consumed by my father-in-law's patriarchal mindset. However, my thoughts were not enough.
Since my dad is eager to have an heir, let's start having children, even though it is not our plan.
I froze for a moment, not understanding what he said. No, my child is not going to be the heir of my in-laws unless he wants to be. Our savings is not yet enough, and you haven't even gotten a raise. How are you going to make a living while raising a child once I got pregnant? Archie sighs deeply in response to my answer.
My parents and your parents will help us, won't they? Of course, it's better to have children while you are young.
Archie tries to force me to proceed with the conversation, and as expected, I was disgusted and rejected him. This led to an awkward relationship between us. I was working and earning enough money to support myself on my own, so the idea of divorcing Archie began to flicker in my mind at this time. I tried many times to discuss the divorce with Archie, but Archie at that time put his father-in-law's words before my opinion, and even if I tried to discuss the divorce with him, I could not get him to agree. When I tried to discuss with Archie, he would repeat my father-in-law's words. It was just a meaningless dialogue with him. However, we started making more visits to our in-laws, and although I really did not like them, I was following Archie with a mysterious sense of obligation that if I refused him, we might not be able to function as a couple at all. My father-in-law's sarcasm got worse every time I saw him, but on the other hand, his pressure on my mother-in-law's eased up, and I managed to keep my spirits up, thinking that this was a relief at least.
Christine, when are you going to become a decent wife who respects her husband? You are really unfit wife, rebelling not only against the patriarch of the family, has no heir, but also against her parents-in-law. You should really be thankful that Archie is not divorcing you.
I let my father-in-law's sarcasm go by saying yes, yes. but I felt that the food tasted worse than usual because of his sarcasm, and I was a little reluctant to eat. I could see that my mother-in-law was looking at me with a worried expression, but I did not pay any attention to this and continued to eat. However, as time went by, I felt my body was getting heavier and my consciousness was getting dimmer. The next moment I realized that it was a sleepiness, but I couldn't stand it anymore, and I fell down on a table, my whole body suddenly losing its strength. In my foggy consciousness, I desperately tried to get myself up, fearing that my father-in-law would scold me again if I didn't get up soon. But I heard Archie's laughter and my father-in-law's.
Finally it worked. Let's carry her to the mattress. That's right. Go make an heir quickly.
I felt a chill deep inside me from their conversation, but unable to resist it, I fell into a deep sleep. When I awoke, my body was on the bed in the hospital room. In my slowly becoming conscious, I noticed my mother-in-law standing by the bed, crying and apologizing to me.
Kristen, thank God! You are awake! I'm so sorry. It's my fault.
I couldn't understand what was going on as my mother-in-law was sobbing, but the nurses and doctors who heard her voice came to the hospital room and explained the situation on her behalf. I woke up the day after I ate the meal, and it was laced with sleeping pills. I was told that the sleeping pills were prescribed to my father-in-law at the hospital, but he and Archie had mixed them in my food.
Police!
I was so surprised and terrified by what the doctor had told me that I screamed out to call the police. But as if waiting for my words, the police came into the hospital room.
Your mother-in-law called us, and we investigated this case.
The police officer interviewed me and told me about my father-in-law and Archie. He told me that they had been brought to the same hospital in a serious condition and were now hospitalized under observation and absolute bed rest. As I was getting confused by the police words, he gave me more details. It seems that Archie and my father-in-law, frustrated by my reluctance to have children, had planned to put me to sleep and then proceed. They used the sleeping pills that had been prescribed for him. The reason why I felt the food tasted bad was not because of the sarcasm of my father-in-law or Archie, but because the food was actually laced with sleeping pills. My mother-in-law, who knew about this plan, tried to persuade them to stop it, but they did not listen to her at all. She tried to tell me directly, but they prevented her from doing so. So she contacted my brother-in-law, who lived far away, and asked him to help her. On that day, he was supposed to arrive at my parents-in-law's house before us, but he was delayed due to traffic. I remember the worried look on my mother-in-law's face as she looked at me, and it made sense. But why are they both in the hospital?
Grant arrived just in time to see Archie and Hank holding you, and pulled you away from them. But they both got mad at him and grabbed at him. But Grant, he wrestles and that's judo.
In other words, they were so angry at him for saving me, and they tried to attack him, but got injured so badly that they had to be hospitalized. However, it seems that Archie had brought out a kitchen knife against him at that time, and it was a close call between self-defense and excessive self-defense. My mother-in-law kept crying during this time, holding my hand.
I'm so sorry.
But I was able to wake up in the hospital because of my mother-in-law's courage. Thanks to you, I was able to escape from their plan. Thank you very much. I then waited for my health to improve, contacted the company, and started working on my divorce from Archie. Again, my mother-in-law told me,
I can only do this much, but...
She gave me not only the recordings of the conversations between Archie and my father-in-law planning this matter, but also the recording of the sarcasm he had been hurling at me.
Why? I've been talking to my eldest son about it for a while. He told me to keep the recordings in case something happens.
I thanked my mother-in-law for her kindness, and at the same time, I asked her, "You're not going to get a divorce?"
Actually, I got divorced and decided to live with my eldest son. I had resigned myself to the fact that I would have no money to live on after the divorce, but Grant said he would take care of it.
My mother-in-law looked a little relieved and told me about the future. I was worried about my mother-in-law, even though we were no longer related, so I was relieved by her words. With the evidence I had received from my mother-in-law, and in consultation with my lawyer, I filed a claim for compensation, a police report, and a restraining order against Archie and my father-in-law, and left the rest to my lawyer, explaining the situation to the company and informing them of my resignation. After hearing my report, the company dismissed Archie on disciplinary grounds and proposed to transfer me to a distant branch. I gratefully accepted and was able to leave my hometown. Incidentally, since my parents had passed away early, I had no family home. This was perceived as a weakness, which encouraged Archie's and my father-in-law's attitude. Archie and my father-in-law were arrested and sentenced to prison. Naturally, his company was told about the incident and dismissed him from his job, even though he was about to retire. My mother-in-law also filed a claim for alimony against my father-in-law on the advice of my brother-in-law, and so she also got divorced. They tried to borrow money from their relatives, but they did not cooperate with them, so they borrowed money from a shady financial institution to pay the alimony. The sanctions against my brother-in-law were also justified by her lawyer, and he ended up without any charges. Archie and my father-in-law lost their house and livelihood, and they tried to rely on my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law, but they were rejected. And now they are living together, blaming each other and living in fear of debt collectors every day. Furthermore, my father-in-law is still suffering from the after effects of the injury he sustained, and Archie has been obliged to take care of him, which has been physically and mentally quite overwhelming for him. I have been contacted several times through my lawyer, but I refused to take any action without asking him what he wanted. So the only information I have about what happened after that is what my mother-in-law, who I have been in contact with occasionally, has told me. As for me, I have begun to get used to the life in a new place, and although I suffered from a trauma so severe that I could not eat anything but my own homemade food at the beginning of the divorce, the symptoms have subsided and I can now eat meals served by restaurants. I can't eat the food that my colleagues sometimes give me, but they all know the situation. Don't worry about it. Surrounded by such warm people, I have recovered mentally and physically, and I'm now enjoying my life alone. My mother-in-law and I have maintained a good relationship even after the divorce, and we sometimes have dinner between our residents. And I have tried many times to thank my brother-in-law for all he has done for me.
It was the worst incident that happened because I ran away from my parents' house and left them alone because I was too lazy to deal with them. So I would rather pay alimony to you too.
But I never let him do that for me. I can't forget everything that happened, but I'm looking forward to the future and hope to recover from it in time.
Is the funeral over yet? If so, hurry back here. It's Mommy's birthday party today. Get the preparations started quickly. Well, now that your parents are no longer here, you can fully devote yourself to serving my parents. This is exactly why I find Daddy's girls so troublesome.
These were the words spoken to me by my husband on the day of my beloved father's funeral,
after he passed away in a car accident. My anger overwhelmed my sorrow, and I decided to seek revenge on this man. With a face wet with tears, I headed towards my in-laws' house and vigorously placed the birthday cake on the table. A few minutes later, the cake melted and collapsed in a fierce blaze. My name is Julia. I'm 33 years old. I met my husband Kevin at a matchmaking party that a friend invited me to. We have been dating for a year and just got married half a year ago. But I already regret this marriage. There's of course a reason for this. Hey Julia, isn't the meat ready yet? You're a butcher's daughter, why are you so inefficient? Sorry everyone, my wife isn't very efficient, he said, grinning and playing the role of the domineering husband in front of his friends and their families from his student days. If you feel that way, why don't you help out a bit? I whispered back to him irritably. There are things we're good and not good at. You're a butcher's daughter, so you must be good at handling meat. I'm letting you look good, you know. Are you stupid? Being good at grilling meat? My boastful husband suddenly decided to host a barbecue. Now, I'm grilling meat non-stop for over 10 people. Why did this happen? My family has something to do with it. My family has been running a butcher shop in the next city since my grandfather's time. Currently, my father is running the shop with my brother and a few part-timers. My mother passed away due to an illness when I was young, but my father filled her absence with his love, so I rarely felt lonely. Thanks to our community-based customer service, our shop is reasonably successful, and we've even been featured on local TV a few times. When my husband's friend found out at a drinking party that I was the daughter of the shop owner, he told my husband that he was envious. At that point, without consulting me, my husband decided, "Oh, then let's have a barbecue at our place next time. I'll let you eat as much meat as you want." Of course, I was furious. Why would you decide to do something so big on your own? Eat as much as you want? Our shop isn't all you can eat. And how are you going to barbecue in a rented apartment with no yard? Do you want to burn down the house? I let loose at my self-centered husband. Even he seemed to realize that he'd messed up. Well, I was drunk and I can't back out now. I've got my pride, you know. Could you ask your dad for me? Just this once, please? Seeing him put his hands together in front of his face and beg, I reluctantly agreed. All right, but just this time, okay? I regretted my decision as I asked my father to prepare enough meat for everyone. That day I was feeling down for the morning. That's because I had assumed we'd be having the barbecue at a facility near our house, but... We're having barbecue at my parents' house, my husband said, and I felt like I was about to collapse. That's because... You made it. It's been years since we've had a barbecue in the yard. I was so excited that I even worked hard cleaning up the yard, she said, completely ignoring my presence and greeting only her son. She was Mary, my mother-in-law. From the start of our marriage, I'd always had a hard time with no. I hated this woman. I don't know if she was lonely because her only son got married, but she's openly hostile towards me. It's like she's a woman who's had her lover stolen away, and I find it creepy. And there's something that I find downright disgusting. We would have done the yard cleaning if you'd said so. You just recovered from a backache, so be careful. But thank you, Mommy, my husband said, sending shivers down my spine. Before we got married, my husband used to call his mother Mom. But after we got married, he started calling her Mommy. He must have been hiding it. I wish he had kept it hidden forever. The word Mommy, coming from a man in his mid-30s, has a particularly creepy ring to it. Like me, my husband also lost his father to illness. At the matchmaking party, he said, "I can only be grateful to my mother for raising me alone." I was attracted to that filial side of him. However, after getting married, he often goes out for meals without me, saying, "I'm going to have dinner with Mommy for the first time in a while on the weekend." He was what you might call a mama's boy. Mary, perhaps,
pleased to be cared about by her son, looked at me with a triumphant face. Sighing, I said, "I want to cut some vegetables, so may I use your kitchen, Mary?" She silently watched me as I cut the vegetables, which was frightening. Then she'd say things like, "What a messy way to cut! Your personality is seeping through. You're clumsy. More importantly, when are you planning to move in with me? Kevin is all for it, you know." I thought about stuffing a raw onion in her noisy mouth, but I held back. To be honest, the topic of living together has come up frequently since we got married. If she was a kind person, I wouldn't have any complaints. But a son who loves his mom and a son who calls her mommy? Nah. There was no way I could imagine living happily together. One of the part-timers quit. It's hard to find a replacement, and it's far from here, so it might be a bit difficult. I keep gently refusing. By the way, none of the part-timers have quit. In fact, they're all experts who've been there for over 5 years. As I was deflecting my grumbling mother-in-law next to me, my husband's friends started to gather. Amid the clamor, the barbecue began, and I kept grilling meat and vegetables diligently.
Come on, Julia, hurry up and grill the meat,
he commanded. Even his friends were more considerate, saying,
Hey, Kev, you should take over for a bit. Julia hasn't eaten anything since we started. Actually, I'll take over. The meat is really delicious.
Thank you. My dad would be happy. I responded with a smile, but my husband was glaring at me. In the end, I only got to eat a few pieces of meat and spent the rest of the time sweating and grilling non-stop. I asked Kevin to switch with me several times, but he'd say things that made no sense, like,
You're better at it, so you do it.
With the matter of Mary and now this, my anger was on the brink of peaking. Several hours later, as we were tidying up, my husband said,
Hey, Julia, what was up with you today? Don't flirt with my friends.
What? As far as I was concerned, I was simply being polite and friendly to them. However, it seemed he didn't like me being all smiles. With my silent response to his ridiculous comment, Mary, grinning, said, She's a butcher's daughter after all. She must be a carnivore. Kevin, be careful. You can always come back to your mommy if things get tough. My patience reached its limit with my husband, who didn't even try to defend me. I slammed the trash bag I was holding onto the floor and said, I'm going home. If your mommy is so important to you, you can stay here forever. And with a glowering look, I headed briskly towards the car. I collected some of my belongings at home and headed straight to my parents' house. I received several calls from my husband, but naturally I was not in the mood to talk, and ignored them all. My father and brother were surprised to see me suddenly return home, but my father was pleased.
It's been a while since I've had your cooking, Julia.
He didn't ask for any details. I complained to the part-time workers at our family's shop about my husband and mother-in-law, and they agreed with me, saying things like, That's enough to warrant a divorce. It's creepy for a grown man to call his mother mommy. After spending about a week in this manner, even my dad said,
Julia, you can't come back here for good, you know. Being divorced isn't unusual these days. Just follow the path that makes you happy. I can also go to that house with you if you want me to.
He's always been good like this. At this point, I no longer had any feelings of love for Kevin, and I was almost certain I wanted a divorce. Despite me returning to my parents' house, he hadn't visited me, and had only been sending condescending messages like,
You should cool down and come back soon.
Even if we chose to reconcile, the outcome was obvious. I doubt there's anyone in this world who could get along with Mary. Our shop was thriving as usual, and I was able to forget about the unpleasant things while working.
I'm going to take a little break. Look after the shop.
My father, the shop owner, said, and the employees responded with a yes, sir. It was a typical scene. But after about 30 minutes, my father hadn't returned. That's unusual for Dad. He usually comes back in about 15 minutes, but he's getting old, so it's good for him to take a slow break sometimes. My brother responded with a disgusted look.
You know, Dad has been asking me if you've been getting harassed or something ever since you came back. I keep telling him to ask you himself. Don't worry him too much.
It was clear that he was concerned about me. Just then, a regular customer, a middle-aged woman, rushed into the shop, panting. There's been an accident at the intersection. Your father is in trouble. Hurry up and go. We had just been talking about the sound of an ambulance siren a few minutes ago. The part-timers insisted that we should leave, saying not to worry about the shop and hurry up. So my brother and I rushed to the scene. There was already a crowd of people there. Let us through, we shouted as we pushed through the crowd, but when we got to the scene, we were speechless at what we saw. It was hopeless. There was a pool of blood under my father's body, and the paramedics were desperately performing CPR, but my father was unresponsive, like a doll. Later, my father was declared dead, shortly after arriving at the hospital. Dad! Dad! I could only cry, but my brother, on the other hand, was running around handling hospital procedures and arranging for the funeral home.
We'll have to close the shop for a while. Julia, let's send Dad off with a smile at the end. Also, you should properly contact your husband, even though you're separated. I nodded quietly at my brother's words. It was the first time I had contacted my husband since that day. He answered the phone surprisingly quickly. What? Have you finally decided to apologize?
His attitude pissed me off, but I said, my father had an accident and passed away. I'll give you the address of the funeral home, and the time is...
Wait a minute. What are you saying all of a sudden? Is it true that your father died?
I could tell that my husband was shaken by my sudden news, but I said, do you think I would joke about something like this? Please tell your mother. Also, I have something I want to discuss with you after the funeral. Now I have to handle some things, so I'll hang up. I sent him the address of the funeral home in a message, and then started rushing around. However, after that, there was no contact from my husband, and he did not appear at the wake.
Julia, what happened to your husband?
My brother asked, and all I could do was force a smile. I couldn't get through on the phone, and he didn't respond to my messages. I reluctantly contacted Mary, but to my surprise, she had blocked my number. In the end, I couldn't reach Kevin on the morning of the funeral. What's going on with your husband, Julia? He wasn't at the wake either, a relative asked. Well, it seems his mother isn't feeling well and he's taking care of her. I lied on the spot but got scolded. No matter how unwell she is, it's not like she's in the hospital or needs caregiving, right? It's absurd to not attend the funeral when your wife's father has passed away. I could only apologize. They were absolutely right. I don't know anyone who lacks common sense as much as him, myself. This is ridiculous. Unbelievable. Just when the funeral was about to start, I noticed my phone on silent mode vibrating. It was a call from Kevin. I have to take this call. I'll be right back. I hurriedly went to the calling space and picked up the phone, and my husband said something outrageous.
Hello? Is the funeral over yet? If so, hurry back here. It's Mommy's birthday party today. Get the preparation started quickly. Well, now that your parents are no longer here, you can fully devote yourself to serving my parents. This is exactly why I find Daddy's girls so troublesome.
Without any apology to me, my husband chattered away cheerfully, which infuriated me. A birthday party? Are you out of your mind? My father's funeral is about to start. Don't tell me you're planning not to come. To my words, he replied,
My friends offered to throw a birthday party for my mommy as a thank you for the barbecue the other day. It would be rude to refuse. Besides, we've only been married for half a year, and I don't really know your father well, so it's not a problem if we don't participate.
His words made me dizzy. I'm not coming to the stupid party. Stop making a fool out of me. I talked to my husband, trying to suppress my rising anger, but he said,
Then at least bring the cake. I asked you to make arrangements for her birthday cake from the start. I don't know where the shop is. Get over here, quickly.
Indeed, I had been asked to reserve Mary's birthday cake a month ago. Basically, this idiotic husband was telling me who was about to start my husband's funeral to bring the cake now. I won't forgive this. This is outrageous. A few hours later, I was standing in front of my in-laws' house. There were loud voices coming from the garden. Sorry for the wait. It was noisy, but it went quiet when I appeared.
Julia, how long were you planning to keep us waiting? You really are an unpleasant wife.
My husband laughed, but none of his friends were laughing.
Julia, that outfit.
It's no wonder they were shocked. I was standing there in a morning dress. My face was messy from tears. Today was my father's funeral. The burial just finished and I rushed over. Kevin was being annoying about bringing the birthday cake for his mother quickly. I laughed weakly.
What? Your father's funeral? Hold on a sec. Kevin didn't tell us anything about that. We only heard that you will be a bit late because of some matters. And Kevin, what the hell are you doing here?
My husband, who was being interrogated by his friend, said,
Well, that, because everyone kindly held a birthday party for my mom.
His words were interrupted by,
Wait, what's this about a birthday party? Today, we decided to gather to thank your wife for the barbecue the other day. How did it turn into celebrating your mother's birthday?
Faced with the unexpected truth, Kevin and Mary, sitting behind him, turned red. What a couple of fools.
Well, but...
Unable to think of any excuse, his words and voice became fewer and smaller until they couldn't be heard.
I thought so at the barbecue too, but isn't your attitude towards your wife too harsh? I've never heard of anyone prioritizing their mother's birthday over attending their wife's father's funeral. Are you crazy? And you too, ma'am.
The gazes directed at my husband shifted to my mother-in-law, and the two of them shrank considerably.
We're leaving. Julia, we'll come again later to pay our respects to your father.
The friends patted on my shoulder, and I smiled weakly. In the silent garden, Kevin said,
Did you enjoy embarrassing me in front of my friends, you fool? Apologize to me right now.
Following his lead, Mary chimed in. That's right. Apologize to Kevin. And make sure you clear up the misunderstanding with our friends. Can't believe I got such a ridiculous woman for a daughter-in-law. I stared silently at the two of them, glaring at me with their faces red. I placed the birthday cake that I was holding on the table without a word. That's right. I've been thinking the same thing, that I married into such an outrageous family. But that ends today. I'm not patient enough to keep playing family with insane people. As I spoke in a calm tone, I stuck candles one by one into the cake. Hey! Their faces turned stiff. Not surprising. I had prepared enough candles for her age. By the way, it was 63. Okay, it's ready. I guess this will do for lighting up the candles. All the candles that were stuffed on top of the cake caught fire from the lighter I held, creating a roaring flame. The surroundings had gotten quite dim. It looked like a small campfire. The cake began to melt from the intense heat and crumbled right in front of Mary. You can blow them out now. It's funny how an old woman like you is still celebrating her birthday. It's not like you're loved enough to be celebrated. I said this and gave a snort.
Are you crazy?
Kevin hurriedly poured a bucket of water on the cake. The water bounced back on the table, completely soaking her upper body.
Sorry, Mommy.
I don't know if it was anger towards me or embarrassment, but Mary, her body shivering, said, Get out! With that, I said, I was planning to leave without you telling me to. This is the last time I'll see you. Hey, Kevin, why don't you marry your mom, you sick mama's boy? I thrust the divorce papers I had prepared into my husband's chest, and then I left my in-laws' house. A few days later, several of my ex-husband's friends came to visit my parents' house. They lit incense for my father's altar and spoke lightly of Kevin. Despite what had happened, my ex showed no signs of remorse. His friends were flabbergasted, and apparently no longer in contact with him. He was so hated that he was blocked on all social media platforms, and I couldn't help but laugh at his misfortune. That day, we were shouting so loudly that the neighbors could clearly hear our conversation. As you might expect, he was getting the cold shoulder from them. He seemed to be participating in matchmaking parties without learning his lesson and was banned from multiple venues because he kept trying to attend with his mother, who said, "I'll make sure to screen her properly." Kevin, who was abandoned by his friends, finally seemed to realize how crazy his mother was. He came to the shop unannounced.
Julia, I was wrong. Won't you give me another chance?
Instead of me, who was ignoring him, part-time ladies told him, "Sir, if you continue to disrupt our business, we will call the police." My ex must have been also very scared of my older brother, a former judo club captain, who threatened him with,
How dare you show up here? Leave in 10 seconds or else.
He never showed his face again. Since then, I've returned to my family home and have been working hard every day with my brother and all the staff. When things settled down a bit, my brother told me,
Our dad, he jumped out to shield a kid who ran onto the road, and that's when he had the accident. He was such a hero.
My brother, who had been largely stoic and didn't even shed a tear at the funeral, cried for the first time. I couldn't stop my tears seeing that, and we both sobbed in front of my father's altar. I swore to protect this shop that my grandfather and father left us, because I believe that's the best way I can honor them going forward.